Hello and welcome. Her devoted work in the jungles of Africa helped us to redefine the way we relate to primates. She went on to inspire generations of wildlife enthusiasts and continues to work with young people across the globe to encourage sustainable development. This week on One on One, meet renowned anthropologist and primatologist, Dr. Jane Goodall. No one knows chimpanzees as well as this veteran of wildlife study. Jane Goodall's fascination with animals began at a very early age and grew to become her passion. It evolved into her career too, when leading anthropologist Leakey recognized her drive and trusted her enough to send her to Africa to study chimpanzees. Dr. Goodall's time at the Gombe Reserve in what is now Tanzania made her a legend, especially as she turned up there as a young white woman accompanied by her mother, the only way the British authorities would allow her to go. Her patient observations changed our understanding of primate behavior, identifying their close-knit social ties and complex relationships, and the use of tools. Though she keeps an active interest in this field of study, Dr. Goodall has recently focused on encouraging young people across the world to have greater awareness of the environment they share with not only each other, but the animal kingdom. It's a real pleasure to talk with you. And you know, we were talking just before we started rolling the cameras that you're actually Dame Jane Goodall now, and also known as Dr. Goodall, but you don't really go much for the formalities. As you said, you've been called so many different things in your life.
Yes, mother of chimpanzees and chimpanzee lady, but Dr. Jane, anything.
Now, you know, as a person who's very dynamic, campaigning a lot for the environment, for wildlife conservation and so on now, to what extent have the chimpanzees had to take a back seat?
The chimpanzees are sort of at the heart of everything, and they in a way are like a link, a bridge between humans and the animal kingdom. And the Gombe research is very flourishing. There are students there, Tanzanian and from outside. So that continues, and that's where I go twice a year for a few days to recharge my batteries, and I hear about what's going on all the time. But of course, the actual research, the hours and hours alone in the forest are a thing of the past.
In which area are you seeing the biggest breakthroughs? What is it that people are realizing most that's right and wrong about what they do when it comes to conservation?
I think that, you know, in the developed world, where we have our youth program, I think that young people are really beginning to understand the impact that their own lives have and thinking about different ways that they can leave a lighter ecological footprint. And also, you know, realizing how so often the environment is being destroyed by people who are living in crippling poverty, and that therefore, unless you improve their lives and make them into your partners, then you can't hope to do effective conservation around wilderness areas in the developing world.
One thing that does come out from reading your articles and your research is you do point the finger at human beings for not really taking very good care of this planet. I mean, you know, in what way do you think that we've really been bad about the way we've treated other creatures? And
I think what's so strange is that here we are, arguably the most intellectually smart creature that's ever walked the face of planet Earth, and we are destroying our home. How come? What's happened? What's happened so that we have all this intelligence, and yet look around at what we're doing with pollution and the dropping levels of the water table and all these terrible things. So it seems to me that we've lost wisdom. If you take the indigenous people, they used to make decisions based on how will this affect our people 7 generations ahead. We're taking them today based on how will this affect me now, or me and my family now? How will this huge decision affect the next shareholders meeting or my next political campaign? And so perhaps there's been a divide between this very, very clever brain and the human heart, thinking of the heart as the seat of love and compassion.
Tell me about your early years, because you were, as a young child, you were very influenced by Tarzan, Dr. Dolittle, all these things, and I guess that sort of set the ball rolling for what you would do as an adult. Now, what do you recall of those very early years?
My first really vivid memory is when I was 4.5, and I went to stay in the country. We lived in town, and we didn't have much money, and this was very exciting. And I was given a job to collect the hen's eggs, and I was putting them in my little basket. No battery farms back then. And, you know, here's the egg, so where did it come out of the hen? I couldn't see a hole like that, and I was asking everyone. And they didn't tell me, so I hid in a hen house and watched. So right from the beginning, it was animals, animals, animals. And then, yes, Dr. Dolittle, and then, of course, Tarzan. Well, I fell madly in love with this glorious Lord of the Jungle. And what did he do? He married that other wimpy Jane. And I was just really jealous.
Going back to that session in the hen house, and that's when you actually disappeared for so many hours that your parents got worried and they called out the police looking for you.
Exactly. Nobody knew where I was.
But your mother didn't tell you off as such, did she?
No, I had this amazing mother. Everything I've done in this life that I can be proud of, I attribute in large part to the way that she brought me up. And when she'd been searching, she was obviously scared stiff because I'd vanished, but she saw this excited little creature in my shining eyes. So instead of saying, "How dare you run off," and all that stuff, she sat down to hear the story. And, you know, she got books I wanted to read, knowing I'd read quicker that way. Animals, animals, animals. And she continued to support me throughout her entire life.
What characteristics in particular do you think you inherited from your mother?
She listened. She was patient. She cared about people. And I always remember her, you know, I was brought up in a Christian family with a congregational grandfather, minister. But I always remember her saying, you know, if you'd been born somewhere in another part of the world, then you would call God Allah. And if you know, so she, right from when I was tiny, I remember realizing that there was this one God, this one spiritual power. And it depended where you were born in the world as to how you worshipped.
How did your father influence you? What traits did you pick up from him?
Well, he went off, I was 4 or something when the war began, and I didn't really see him after that. But I think what I inherited from him genetically was a really tough constitution. I mean, he loved as a hobby racing, and he could go all day without water, and he didn't need to eat much, and you know, that's really lucky for me.
Let me just take you back to this time in your childhood when you were given Jubilee. Tell me about Jubilee.
Jubilee was given to me by my father. He was a chimpanzee. He was commemorating the first chimp born in captivity in England in the Jubilee year. And he's still got him, he's about this big. And everybody said to my parents, "You can't give a child that, it'd be terrifying." And of course, he was my favorite toy. He went everywhere with me. He's lost all his hair because I, you know, loved him to boredom. and I didn't go to Africa with a passion for primates. I went to Africa because I wanted to live with animals and write books about them. And I would have studied any animal, but Louis Leakey offered me the opportunity to study chimpanzees. So it's nice to look back and say, well, maybe Jubilee had something to do with it, but I don't think he really did.
You have a condition which you suffered silently for a long time, prosopagnosia, I think is how it's pronounced.
Face blindness is easier.
Right, and it's something that until more was known about it, you didn't really speak much about, and actually your sister also had it as well. How did that affect your work? I mean, being a very public person too, how did that affect the fact that you had difficulty in recognizing faces you'd met?
It's horrible, it's embarrassing. That's why I wrote about it in my book, because you know, you feel so stupid, and then you think, well, this person must think I'm mad. I was with her yesterday, and I don't recognize them. Of course, after a while, I do. Some people don't. You know, Oliver Sacks told me he didn't recognize his secretary after 10 years. Well, it's not like that for me, but it is awkward. I hate it. There's nothing you can do. I mean, you simply can't do it. You have to learn marks on people. And yes, it affected with the chimpanzees as well.
But the prosopagnosia didn't affect you with chimpanzees that much, did it, really?
Well, in the same way as it does with people.
It
would take me longer to learn a chimp face, but it's not just the face with the chimp, you know, it's the shape, and so it was a bit easier, I think.
Let me ask you about your time. You know, you studied secretarial courses. You're obviously never destined to be stuck behind a desk as a secretary. So let me ask you about that, the skills that you developed there, because I think Louis Leakey, who you mentioned, obviously found you very organized, he had found you with certain skills that he liked in you. What was it, do you think, that he sort of identified that made him say, okay, this is the right person to go and take some of these studies on?
It wasn't secretarial. I was never very good at it, I'm afraid. It was just that, you know, my passion was Africa. Everybody told me that was impossible. We didn't have the money. Africa was the dark continent. I was the wrong sex, quite honestly, except Mum. who used to say, if you really want something, you work hard, you take advantage of opportunity, and you never give up, you find a way. So when all my friends went to university, when I left school, we couldn't afford it. So she said, do a secretarial job of training, and then maybe you can get a job in Africa. Well, eventually, after I'd saved up money, that's what happened. And then I heard about Louis Leakey and went to see him. And he gave me a job straight away. His assistant was leaving. But I really wasn't a frightfully good secretary, I must say. And what he saw in me, I think he realized when he took me on an expedition to Olduvai Gorge searching for fossils. And then he realized that I didn't care about boyfriends and clothes, parties, hair, you know, none of that. I just wanted to be out. And he saw how at home I was in the African plains, even though I'd never been there before, and just knew what to do.
And your mother was so supportive, she actually traipsed around the world and particularly went off to live in Africa with you.
Well, what happened was, you know, the first time I went, I was on my own when I met Louis. And then he offered me the opportunity for the chimps. Well, yes. Took a year to get the money. I mean, who was going to give? I had no degree, nothing. And I was straight from England. It was absurd, really. Finally, you got some money. And then in those days, Tanzania was the British protectorate of Tanganyika. And the British authorities were refused to take responsibility for this young girl on her own. But in the end, they said, well, if she has a companion. So for 4 months, this amazing mother packed up and came, and she started a little clinic for the local people with the medicines her brother gave her. She wasn't a doctor or a nurse. And because she spent hours with people, say, you know, the old saline drip, teaspoon of salt and warm water, drip, drip, dripping on tropical ulcers, she made amazing cures and established a wonderful relationship for me with the local people ever since.
We're going to pause for just a moment, but we're back with more questions for you in a moment. Don't go away. We'll be back with more one-on-one with Jane Goodall in just a second.